Parsing API JSON responses is one of those things that keeps coming back. We've already seen how to do it with the movie database, but this time, we're taking it a step further. In this video, we're going to refactor that code and make it reusable using Swift generics. With the refactored code, we'll be able to parse our YouTube API response. We can open Data Fetcher to start. Parsing the response and our fetch titles function starts from let data URL response till var titles. This code will be similar to parsing the YouTube response, the only difference being what object we return. We could just copy and paste the code down to our fetch video ID function. However, this is the perfect moment to introduce Swift generics. This can also be good code for later projects. Let's make some space after the fetch title closing brace. We'll make the function here first, test it, then call it for the YouTube response. Func fetch and decode, left arrow t colon decodable, right arrow, parentheses URL colon URL, comma type colon t dot type, parentheses async throws, return arrow t with braces. T colon decodable lets the function know that the struct we're working with must conform to decodable. We pass in two arguments, a URL and a struct using t.type. T.type means we're passing a generic struct that we want to decode, like API object.self. The function will perform a network request and can throw an error, which is why async and throws are needed. Finally, it will return a struct represented by t. Select from let data URL response to var titles, cut with command X, paste it inside our fetch and decode function. We just need some adjustments. Replace fetch titles URL with URL. Delete var titles equals at the end. Replace with return. API object should be t.self. Finally, delete .results. We replaced our hard-coded values with the arguments we passed into the function. Here's a quick recap of what this code does. We use try await URL sessions that share that data to fetch data from the URL passed into the function. This gives us both data and a URL response. Then, we unwrap the response and make sure it's a HTTP URL response with a 200 status code. If it's not, we throw a custom next step error that describes what went wrong. After that, we define a JSON decoder and tell it to use .convert from snake case. This is needed since our JSON keys are snake case, but our Swift structs use camel case. Lastly, we use that decoder to try and return the object type t from the URL data. T is the generic type we pass into the function. We can actually replace this with type since we already defined the variable. Now we just need to call this function and fetch titles. Click under print fetch titles URL, var titles equals try awaits, fetch and decode, fetch titles URL, API object.self, .results. Going back to title.swift, remember that API object has a variable called results, and that's where the titles live. I think a rename is in order because we're now working with two APIs. Right-click API object, refactor, rename, add TMDB at the front, enter. Navigate back to datafetcher.swift. To clean up our struct a bit more, let's move the helper functions to the end. Select fetch and decode and build URL. Command X, paste them under fetch video ID. The final step is to use our new function to finish fetch video ID. Select after the print statement, make some space, return, try, await, fetch and decode, fetch video URL, YouTube, search response, .self, .items, .first, .id, .video ID, question mark, quotes. We pass in the YouTube search response struct this time. Remember, the struct is pretty nested. It returns a list of items, so we grab the first item in the array. From there, we drill down to video ID, chaining each level with a question mark to safely unwrap. If anything in the chain is nil, we return an empty string using a double question mark operator. We're done with parsing the API responses. The fetch video ID func isn't hooked up anywhere, but we can still test to make sure our new function works for fetch titles. Please update your TMDB key inside API config.json before running. Hit Command R. Our simulator is up and everything loaded correctly. Click around to make sure everything is working. Good job with this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.